NASA lies to you in ways that would be obvious to any parent who has a child who eats cookies from the cookie jar and then lies about it. But we don't hold NASA to the same level of, accountability that we hold our own children or nephews or cousins, little brothers, all that kind of stuff. We have, let's say that we live in our little house or apartment, and for some reason we have a cookie jar. And the cookie jar is glass. We can see right through it. We can see the cookies. And our kid is right there. We come in, and the kid's hand goes behind his back, and then wipes the... you look at the cookie jar, and you look at the kid, and half of the cookies, it's like 12 big cookies, are gone. And you look at the kid, and you go, what just... I've been gone for 2 hours. And the kid says, now hold on a second. I know what this looks like, but there's a mystery particle that is coming through, and I need money to study the mystery particle that's causing the disappearance of these cookies. All right, shut up. Go to your room. And you go behind the back and take the cookie and put it back. Not very difficult to figure out. Now, what happens when NASA plays the cookie jar game? We believe them. We send them money because they're big grown-up scientists, and they have guys like Neil deGrasse Tyson out front saying, I'm in charge, and I'm a scientist, and he goes on Jon Stewart's show, and they fillet each other and shake hands and high-five that they're against young Earth creationism. But I got to tell you something. It's not young Earth creationism that they have to battle. It's actual science. It's actual research. Here's an article from Space.com taking a Hubble NASA photo directly from the NASA.com website and even quoting the first line. It goes like this. This NASA Hubble telescope image shows the distribution of dark matter. Did you hear that? It shows dark matter. It shows where the dark matter is. It shows that we can see the distribution of dark matter in the center of giant galaxy cluster Able 1689, containing about 1,000 galaxies and trillions of stars. They told us that we're going to see the dark matter. What's the next line? Dark matter is an invisible form of matter. Well, wait, that accounts for most of the universe's mass?
When I was talking with the gentleman from Belcom, and we were discussing the lie, everything he was telling me was different from what we were being told was the truth. And at one point I asked him, I said, man, you guys, you lied about a lot, didn't you? And instantly he said, no, we didn't lie about certain things. We lied about everything. None of it was true. I really don't think people realize how deep the lie goes.
Space, the final frontier.
Space may be the final frontier, but it's made in a Hollywood basement.
The Vector, NASA's official logo. If you've ever looked at NASA's official logo, both their official insignia and their official seal, you'll see that the most prominent object in the seal is a red swooshing object. They call that the chevron or the vector. If you ask NASA's Public Affairs Office, this symbology is featured so heavily in their insignia and seal, they'll give you what really amounts to the standard facile cover story for the unilluminated. They'll tell you that that is a representation of a hypersonic wing design from the 1950s, which was the time the logo was created. Not exactly the case. Someone might want to ask the Russian Federal Space Agency, Roscosmos, that was formed in 1992, why they chose that same logo. And while you're at it, you can go ask the Chinese, who formed their space agency in 1996, why in the world they're using a hypersonic wing design from the 1950s as their official logo. Then you can ask the Japanese, the South Koreans, Taiwanese, Malaysia, Mexico, Iran, all of these countries, even Bulgaria. They all utilize the vector symbology in their space agency logos for their national space agencies. It gets even deeper. You can go look at the individual manned program patches for NASA. The Mercury program, for example, a blatant use of covert symbology. In every logo dealing with the Mercury program, you'll see what looks like a number 7 in their logo. And again, NASA's official story is that they put this number 7 there so that they could pay homage to the original 7 Mercury astronauts. Kind of forgetting the fact that only 6 Mercury astronauts actually flew into space because number 7 never did. Deke Slayton had a heart problem, so he didn't get to go up. So there were only 6 Mercury astronauts. Yet there's a 7 in every single logo. That's in the official mission or official program insignia for Mercury, as well as the 6 individual mission patches carry this logo. And it carries on to the Space Shuttle program. If you look at the Apollo logo has a big letter A in it. At least that's what they want you to believe, but it's not. Again, that's just a simple way of explaining away the inclusion of this vector symbology in the logo. If you go to the Space Shuttle program, the original Space Shuttle STS program patch is a triangular patch that, again, hides the use of the chevronic vector symbology. And that also goes for many of the STS-specific mission patches. Every single one of the International Space Station expedition patches carry the vector symbology. The Russian Mir space station used the vector symbology. That was their official logo. And you can even go deeper and look at military-industrial complex companies. Look at the logo on a company like Lockheed Martin, 2 vectors. The X-Prize logo, Ames Research Labs, U.S. Space Command. When you get into the military realm, the United States Space Command, their official logo is the vector symbol. And when you look at the military's individual space-specific programs, all of them deal with vector symbology in their official insignias. And the question really becomes, who or what are these people paying homage to? And the truth, quite frankly, is out of this world.
No, this is what the bit is about. The bit is about that we are on a rock flying through the universe, which is the most spectacular thing anybody could ever possibly imagine, and yet nobody brings it up ever. People talk about crazy, boring, mundane things when we are on a rock flying through space, and that never comes up. That above you is the most spectacular thing you could ever look at ever. And yet people take these huge trips to go see the Grand Canyon, and they're like stare, like, oh my God, it's amazing, you have to see it, and it changes your life. And I'm like, how about up there? Like, look at all that.
Speaking of flying through space, you don't think the moon landing is real?
No, I don't. No. Do you?
Yeah.
Why do you think the moon landing is real? Why don't you tell me why?
I saw it on television.
Oh, you're a genius. Oh, beep that. Hit
Okay,
that.
we'll bleep it. No, it's okay. We got
That's
it.
genius. You saw it on TV? That's awesome. I'm going to show you some CGI. I'm going to show you King Kong. I saw that on TV, too. There's an 80-foot gorilla. He's running around kidnapping white chicks. You should check it out. 1972 was the last time a human being has been through the Van Allen radiation belt. 1972. That's the last time. There's been only 7 trips ever that human beings have ever gone past 400 miles. Every single space station mission, every space shuttle, every satellite, all of those are inside the protective Van Allen radiation belts, which start at 1,000 miles. They go from 1,000 miles to, depending on who you ask, if you ask NASA, 24,000 miles. If you ask James Van Allen, the guy who discovered it, it's 67,000 miles of intense radiation that's in a gigantic donut band that covers around the Earth. Now, even if you got outside of that band, you have to deal with solar cycles. There's the apex of a 20-year solar cycle was between 1969 and 1972. All the time when these guys are making those missions. Any one of those guys out there in those tiny little aluminum shielded crafts would have been killed instantly during any solar flare.
Why fake it?
Thank you, Colin. Why fake it? Why not fake it?
You should open with that.
If you look at any of the footage online, it looks ridiculous. It looks stupid. If you look at the videos, it looks ridiculous and dumb. You know why? Because in 1969, nobody anticipated that we were going to have VCRs and the internet. We were going to be able to watch that. They wanted to win the Cold War. The Soviet Union's had over 10 firsts in space. First man in space, first woman in space, first, they had everything. First dog in space. They had first satellite. They were so much more advanced than the Americans were. But the Americans were more advanced in trickery. And that's what they did. They figured out a way to fake it. That's why when Neil Armstrong got back, first of all, he went insane. They went into a deep depression. So did Buzz Aldrin. Became a huge alcoholic. He gave no interviews. Neil Armstrong still to this day will not give interviews. He gave one speech that he gave at the 25th anniversary of the moon landing. And this is what he said in front of America's best honor students. He said, "We have here amongst us America's best and brightest." And the quote was, "You will achieve many great things if you could peel away one of truth's hidden layers." That's a speech this guy gives standing in front of the top honor students of the country. Not, "I went to the moon." He doesn't say that. He gives this cryptic speech. Now, Bill Clinton, in page 100, I think it's 156 of his book, My Life, he gives this story about how when he was a kid, he was working with this carpenter. And this carpenter said, "You know, I don't believe man landed on the moon." It was 3 months after the moon landing. And he said, "I thought that guy was ridiculous." He said, "You know what? I don't believe anything those TV fellows show you." He said, "After 8 years in the White House, I thought maybe that guy was ahead of his time."
Wow.
This is in Bill Clinton's autobiography.
Wow.
This is in his book. There's no way people went on the moon. There's no way. It's impossible today. China wants to go back to the moon. They don't even have a clue how to do it. They're going to try to get there in 2020. America thinks we could possibly go back in 2017. All of the hard data, the telemetry data, 14,000 reels is missing. No one can find it. What the telemetry data is, that's the binary data, the ones and the zeros that show the distance between the command module and the Earth during every step of the way on the way to the moon and back, which you can't fake. They don't have that. They can't find it. Which you would think would be in a locked golden vault in the Smithsonian. But no, they can't find it. Well, they say, well, you know, they placed laser reflectors on the moon. You could shoot a laser beam. That's proof. Well, it's not proof because the Russians did it twice with unmanned probes. The Russians also collected space samples and samples of the moon.
Very amazing, and I've had these guys on. And
Which guys?
You know, the different guys on the internet that are behind.
There's a lot of guys, and I've debated that one guy, that Phil Plait from Battersea. I clown that guy.
The guy that gets in every astronaut's face.
Well, that guy's crazy Christian, and he's nuts. Which is, you know what, you have to be a little crazy to look that deep into this theory because it seems so solid. We went to the moon. It seems so solid until you look into it.
But here's the only thing. We can't keep anything quiet in this country.
It doesn't matter. No one's keeping it quiet.
Everybody
you can go look
NASA,
at it.
The astronauts, I mean,
those guys are afraid of their lives. Gus Grisham, the pilot who was the guy who died on the launch pad along with 2 of his friends, he was a public critic of NASA. He put a lemon, he hung it on the simulator, put a lemon and put it on a hanger and hung it. He was dead in that same cockpit. He died like 2 weeks later. He burned to death inside of that. They were terrified. This is a matter of life and death. These guys were in the middle of a huge Cold War between Russia, and they wanted to show that America had technological superiority. The race to the moon landing, all that stuff is not about going to the moon and collecting things. It's about military superiority. It's about the ability to do things with military technology. All that stuff they use for NASA, all the stuff they use for the stealth bomber, the space shuttle, all those missions, it's not for philanthropy missions. That's to fuel the military-industrial complex. The machine behind this is all the military. And getting to the moon first is making a statement that we have military technological superiority over Russia, and that's what they did.
Is Bigfoot real?
I don't know. You tell me.
Aaron Rainin has a documentary called Did We Go? Did We Go? Did We Go? Aaron?
Well, Glenn, what do you think? Do you think we landed on the moon?
Yeah.
Now, how do you prove it? How can what's your evidence?
I will tell you this, Aaron, and I'm really bummed, but Mr. Aldrin is in the hospital, but I talked to him about an hour ago. I called Buzz up in the hospital, and I said, hey, Buzz, could you be on the show tonight? He's like, in the hospital, can't talk long. And I thought, conspiracy. I asked him, did you walk on the moon? And he said, yeah. I said, have you heard this theory from this guy? And he said, yeah. I have. I said, does it hack you off? You were on the moon walking around. And he said, no, you can't let people like that hack you off. No, I walked on the moon. So I'm going to trust Buzz.
Well, I
could trust you.
Well, I mean, let's say you trusted your television set, really, didn't you? That's how most of us believed it.
No, I got it from Buzz.
Yeah, well,
I got it from Buzz.
I mean, for instance, let's think about what you believe on TV. I'm actually nowhere near this bridge. This is shocking.
My gosh!
But
is
it's a
this
television
the magic
set
of
behind
television?
me. Yes.
Oh my!
So, a grainy moon landing. I mean, Glenn, to me, it's incredible that we can keep track of Egyptian pots from 2,000 years ago, but we lose tapes made only 40 years ago.
Well, wait a minute. There is a very good explanation. It's the government. You tell me how they... Let me give you two things on the government. One, tell me the thing that the government has done right. Okay, they're keeping tapes? No, not so much. Second of all, do you really think with the New York Times of the world that the government could keep this secret for this long?
Well, let's remember, first of all, there was a Cold War going on,
right,
and us landing on the moon sent a real strong message to the Soviet Union that we could plop a nuke bomb right there. Okay, I hear what you're saying.
No, I mean, come on.
Hey,
man.
listen, watch the film. Did we go? You'll see where I actually traveled.
What happened to the missing, like the Challenger guys? Where are they? Have we rented families to weep?
Well, I'm just an expert on the moon landing, and what I can say, and I know you have a tape there, is I tracked down Gene Kranz, who's the flight director of Apollo 11. He admitted to me the tapes are missing.
All right, go ahead. Play Gene Kranz, please.
I haven't seen anything that indicates the telemetry data is even in existence, and as I said, even if we had it, we don't have the machines to play it back.
But your own research has shown the telemetry data is missing.
That's right.
It's missing. How am I going to prove it? You know, this film, Did We Go, at moonhoax.com, was commissioned by the state of Ohio in anniversary of the 30th anniversary, and I couldn't prove it. I mean, if I can't get a hold of those telemetry tapes, those original videotapes, how are you going to prove it? Moon rocks fall in Antarctica. I sent a laser beam to the moon.
You know, let me do this. Okay. You also have another clip that I saw, and
an interview with
I
Buzz
thought you
Aldrin.
were a nut job, and then I saw this clip, and I thought,
Where were you on July 20th, 1969?
I was on the surface of the moon.
Well, did you see the twitch? The little mouth twitch? I mean...
The what twitch?
The mouth twitch after he said I was on the surface of the moon. You're the expert. You interview people all the time. Is he lying, Glenn, or is it just... You know, it's like Peter Pan. They just want us to believe in the moon landing like Peter Pan,
Aaron,
and I just won't accept that.
I do have to tell you that I believe you.
Thank you, Glenn.
All right, you bet. Aaron.
Mr. Armstrong, I do realize that when you were on the moon, you had very little time for gazing upwards. But could you tell us something about what the sky actually looks like from the moon? The sun, the earth, the stars, if any, and so on?
The sky is deep black when viewed from the moon, as it is when viewed from cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the moon. The Earth is the only visible object other than the sun that can be seen, although some reports have seen planets. I myself did not see planets from the surface, but I suspect they might be visible. The Earth is quite beautiful from space and from the moon. It looks quite small and quite remote, but it's very blue and covered with white lace of the clouds, and the continents are clearly seen, although they have very little color from that distance.
What about the sun? Could you see any trace of the corona?
No, the glare from the sun on the helmet visor was too difficult to pick out the corona. The only time we could see the corona was during an eclipse of the sun from the moon. That is, when we were flying through the moon's shadow and could observe the solar corona peeking out from behind the moon.
stars like in space? Like, are they just brighter than on Earth, or how would you describe it?
They're brighter, but they're different. A lot of things different about them. One, you don't have the atmospheric distortion, so they don't twinkle, right? So you see lots of points, and you see lots of points, and literally millions of them. There's, the thing about Carl Sagan, billions and billions, there really are billions and billions of stars, and you can see them. In fact, they're so numerous, it's very difficult to pick out the constellations you and I see here on the ground. And I live in Colorado, and you get up on a clear night in Colorado up in the mountains where there's no light, and you can see all these stars. Well, multiply that by 1,000. That's what it's like in space. And then when you're outside doing a spacewalk, and you have that one or two opportunities where you can let your eyes adjust, you can start to notice that some of the stars have colors we don't see here on the ground. So you see these pastel colors, light yellows, light pinks, light oranges, even light red ones, and light blue. There's all kinds of colors that you can see in these stars that you can't see here because it's filtered out by the atmosphere.
Whilst
from Mark Cameron. This is from Mark Cameron.
Whilst in space, have you ever looked away from Earth into the black void?
Because you can see, because you can see the stars.
Oh yeah.
And pretty much all the time you can see the stars.
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon. The sky is a deep black when viewed from the moon, as it is when viewed from cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the moon.
And we could not see stars.
It's not a black void. I mean, it's black, but there's all kinds of little polka dots.
There's all the stars there, and the cool thing is about it, you can see it during the day.
And when you're in space and you're looking into deep space and you're on the sun side of the orbit, the sunlight washes out all the starlight, so you can't see any stars, just like here on Earth.
There's all the stars there, and the cool thing is about it, you can see it during the day.
Okay, I'm talking with Bill Kaysing, and Bill Kaysing is you might call a pioneer in this whole issue of getting at truth and reality, and specifically in the area of the Apollo moon missions, what happened and what didn't happen. And when the module set down on the surface of the moon, the amount of propulsion that would have been required to do that, and it leaves no cloud of dust, no crater.
Having seen hundreds of rocket firings when I was employed by Rocketdyne, I know that the jet of the lunar module lander, the lunar lander, would have created an enormous crater. It would have scoured the moon's surface. It would have tossed up rocks, sand, everything, and created a crater maybe so large that the entire lunar lander could have sunk into it. After all, we're dealing with a 10,000-pound thrust engine, which is pointed directly at the surface, lowered into the surface, and yet, if you look at pictures of the lunar lander on the moon, there is no disturbance whatsoever under the lunar lander's rocket.
And no dust deposited in the pads, the cup-shaped pads at the bottom.
That's another good point. Dust would have been blown 6 ways from Sunday and would have landed everywhere.
And then the famous scene, which has been played over and over, where they are landing there, but they're setting down, and you're hearing the astronaut talking through it.
Oh, that's a good point. I let's say, became aware of that only recently, that here's Neil Armstrong talking about landing on the moon with a microphone, and yet he is sitting practically on top of a rocket engine that is putting out sound levels of about 140 or 150 decibels. Now, we know that that is absolutely impossible to overcome that sound level inside the lunar lander. with a normal human voice.
Eagle, we got you now. It's looking good, over. Roger, copy. Eagle, Houston, after yaw around, angled S-band pitch, -9er, yaw, +18. Roger, you're a go to continue power descent. You're a go to continue power descent.
Altitude now 21,000 feet, still looking very good. Velocity down now to 1,200 feet per second.
You're looking great to us, Eagle.
It's clear from these rarely seen color television pictures that the crew of Apollo 11 high-resolution color video camera with them on their mission. Yet the only pictures broadcast live from the moon's surface were these from a low-definition black and white camera. In fact, the networks complained because in addition to this, they were forced to shoot the images, second generation, off of a projection TV of the technology of 30 years ago, and were not even allowed to take a direct feed, which further degraded the quality and clarity of the images. Perhaps this was precisely what NASA and the federal government had in mind. After all, it was a first, regardless of where they were. Better to open up their debut mission with fuzzy pictures and numerous blackouts, rather than show too much revealing detail of a false scene that was yet unproven. And finally, the element that seals their fate. The footage of Apollo 11 requested from NASA over a 5-year period. One gem was discovered just before the completion of this documentary. An old reel received by mistake. It contains the raw or unedited footage of the crew of Apollo 11, Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin Jr., and Neil Armstrong, staging part of their mission for nearly an hour in living color, with exceptionally clear behind-the-scenes audio of conversations discussing the techniques used to achieve a disingenuous picture depicting the Earth at a distance, in order to falsely demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. It cannot be misconstrued that this staging was done for some other reason, for the reel itself is slated and dated July 18th, 19th, and 20th, 1969, the very days of the mission when they were said to be approaching and achieving lunar orbit. Furthermore, it is apparent they are in genuine zero gravity of the actual spacecraft, necessary to convince the mass media of their authenticity, just not any further than Earth orbit, as you will see. In this never-before-seen or heard footage, not only is the radio conversation between the astronauts and Houston Control audible, there is a secondary, private conversation taking place between the crew and a third confidential party, prompting the astronauts with what to say, when to speak, and how to effectively manipulate the camera to achieve the desired misleading effect. NASA claims that the Houston transmissions were the only ones taking place with the astronauts. Listen now as Houston Control initiates a conversation with the crew, only to find them too preoccupied with the behind-the-scenes trickery to respond. Moments pass, and the oversight is picked up on by the clandestine third party, who quickly prompts them with talk. Immediately, Neil Armstrong speaks.
Apollo 11, Houston, Goldstone says that the TV looks great, over.
Again, the illusion they are attempting to create is the Earth at a distance to demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. Understand, too, that only about 20 seconds of this raw footage was ever broadcast to the public, and these conversations discussing their deception were believed to be private until now. Here they discuss that these television transmissions were in fact not broadcast live as everyone believed. They were first screened and edited for playback later.
Roger, Neil, we just wanted a narrative such a weekend when we get to playback, we can sort of correlate what we're coming.
Here they discussed the fact that they have turned out the lights and have blocked out sunlight from entering the spacecraft through the other windows, as to not cause any reflected light to fall onto the spacecraft's wall in the foreground.
Okay, very good. Well, we shut out the sun coming in from the other end of the spacecraft, so it's looking through the number one window under it, any reflected light.
The reason this was done is so that the truth of the matter would not be revealed. It is this. Though the federal government would have you believe that this is a view of Earth from a distance out of the spacecraft's window as it nears the moon, it is not. What they have ingeniously done is placed the camera at the back of the spacecraft and centered the lens on a circular window in the foreground, outside of which it is completely filled with the Earth in low orbit. The circumference of the window then appears to be the diameter of the Earth at a distance, with the darkened walls of the spacecraft appearing to be the blackness of space around it. That is why they wanted the interior dark and blocked out the sun from any other windows. Here you can see the extruded window, probably 2 inches thick at the bottom. This is because the Earth's shine is coming in at a downward angle. It also causes the Earth to appear to be an irregularly shaped circle, for you are seeing the outside of the window at the bottom and the inside of the window at the top, which together form 2 different sized halves of a circle.
Apollo 11 photographs have a ton of inconsistencies, not the least of which is this spotlight effect we can see here. If you play with the brightness a little bit, it accentuates the fact that the guy is standing in a circle of light. In more than one photograph. There are later Apollo mission photographs that do seem to show what looks to me like sunlit terrain. Unlike the Apollo 11 photos. The problem with the next photograph is that they took no other light source with them to the moon. The sun is the only thing that's lighting things up there. He's in the shadow of the lunar module, so how do we see reflections off his boot heels? And how does one leg cast a shadow on the other leg? These types of things are all indicative of another light source. They're consistent with another light source to the right of the camera. The copper-colored piece of equipment in this next series has solar panels coming out the right and left sides. Now, that right side isn't exactly what I would associate with 1960s solar technology, but what do I know? Maybe the cameraman will step to the left and give us a view of that left-hand solar panel. Okay, see, that is what I expect to see out of solar technology, sort of a glassy, mirrory, reflective finish there. Not this matte black kind of coloring. I don't understand why they're different. The next photo confirms that the left side is a mirrory kind of finish. Maybe if we get him to step to the left one more time, he'll get us a real good shot of that solar panel. Look, man, you cannot start with this, proceed to this, and end with this. It's just bad storytelling. You lose your audience. You make them disbelieve. What is this? And why don't they want you getting a good up-close look at it? Keep in mind, the argument my government wouldn't lie to me about that is the moralistic logical fallacy.
Here they are landing, and you can see the pudding effect of the soil. And now you see those strange, what I call special effects light rays. If that were really sand, it would be covering up all of that, which is beneath it. But it doesn't. It doesn't fill in holes. It doesn't cover mounds. And it looks like light rays photographed underwater, not dust being shot away at a 10,000-pound thrust. One can imagine. And you can see here, nothing gets covered up. Nothing changes when it lands. There it is.
The original plan had called for Young and Duke to get out and explore shortly after landing. However, the near abort had lasted 6 hours. The tired astronauts would sleep. Their first traverse would take them about 1 kilometer west of the landing site. They would make 2 stops to collect samples and conduct experiments.
Now, this is the most interesting thing, Frank. There's the rover on the top of the hill. Notice the rock in the center. It looks like an alligator with its mouth open. And look at all the other rocks. You're going to see them again.
You're just beautiful. That is the most beautiful sight.
Note the rover on the top of the hill.
Today they were headed a little over 4 kilometers south to climb their rover up the side of Stone Mountain.
Man, we're really going up a hill, I'll tell you.
Their first station, a crater 700 feet above their lunar module.
And there it is again, Frank. The same mountain, the same alligator rock, different time, different day, no rover in the background. This has to be your biggest embarrassment. This was a stage set somewhere in America.
Absolutely unreal.
They should have caught this, but they didn't. If there's ever proof that you faked all of this, this frame alone would do it.
Main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower. Engines at 65%. 3 engines running normally. 3 good fuel cells. 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles. Downrange distance 3 nautical miles. 1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles. Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
On the 28th of January 1986, the world watched as the Challenger space shuttle exploded off the coast of Florida, 73 seconds after takeoff from the Kennedy Space Center. The intended mission was to study the approach of Halley's Comet, which could be seen from Earth between 1985 and 1986. The mission was also intended to begin the Teacher in Space project, which was first pitched to Ronald Reagan in 1984. The intention of this new method of teaching was to take school teachers into space, where they could record their findings and share them with students once they returned to Earth. Krista McAuliffe was one of the 7 crew members of the Challenger and was meant to be the project's first participant. McAuliffe and 6 other members, Dick Scobie, Michael J. Smith, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick and Gregory Jarvis were all reported to have died that day, and of course they would have. The whole world saw, or at least would have heard, of the shuttle exploding in dramatic fashion. Now the explosion was said to be caused by the erosion of the O-ring seals of the rocket boosters due to the unusually cold weather. These eventually disintegrated after takeoff and led to the explosion. Moving on almost 30 years, a conspiracy theory hit the internet in May of 2015, which suggested, with a very respectable argument, that the crew of the Challenger, or at least 6 of them, are actually alive and well today. Post shows recent pictures of individuals thought to be the same crew members, some with undeniable likenesses, along with information on their whereabouts and even their professions. Now, before I look at each individual crew member, it's worth mentioning that I do wonder why it has taken 30 years for this theory to emerge. This information, if accurate, must have been available for some time now. Some conspiracy theorists believe that there was no explosion at all, that the whole thing was fabricated. The same people would say that the moon landing, only 3 years before the Space Shuttle program began, was an elaborate hoax too. If there was an explosion that day, there must have been crew on board who perished. The real question here is, were the crew who died on board the Challenger the same crew of individuals the world had become so familiar with? Did NASA have doubts about the safety of the mission? Were they protecting these would-be heroes from a mission they thought to be too dangerous? And if the mission was a success, would they be heralded as heroes who weren't even there, having their roles played by a less important, disposable crew? These are all additional questions that came to me whilst wondering why NASA would want to cover up this case, if indeed they did. For now though, let's look at the alleged crew members. Francis Richard Scobie, or Dick Scobie, was commander of the ill-fated Challenger. He was a celebrated combat aviator during the Vietnam War, after which he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, an award given in the US for heroism and extraordinary achievement during times of war. He also gained many other accolades over the years. His part in the 2015 conspiracy theory is supported by a photo of a man by the name of Richard Scobie, a chief executive working for a Chicago-based advertising agency called Cows in Trees. Looking at this image, there is no doubting the likeness, but it's worth mentioning that the likeness on the photos which appear on the agency's website are less apparent. Was the image that the conspiracy theory relied on manipulated? Possibly, but 30 years have passed and it's reasonable enough to think that it could be him. Michael J. Smith was named as pilot for the Challenger mission. In 1963 he graduated from Beaufort High School in South Carolina with a Bachelor of Science degree and went on to achieve a Master's in Aeronautical Engineering in 1968. He flew during the Vietnam War and was said to have flown 28 different types of civilian and military aircraft, logging 4,867 hours of flying time before joining NASA. His part in the 2015 conspiracy theory is supported by a photo of a University of Wisconsin professor by the same name. Now, according to the university's website, this man does exist, and there is no doubting the staggering likeness in the two photos, albeit 30 years apart. In fact, out of all of the supporting conspiracy photos, Michael J. Smith of Wisconsin holds the strongest likeness to his 1986 would-be doppelganger. In fact, the Michael J. Smith at the University of Wisconsin is thought to have been born in the same year as the astronaut. Another unbelievable coincidence, or just further proof that he is in fact the astronaut in question. Incredibly, 2 of the 6 crew members thought to be alive today are accused of lying about being their twin siblings, the first being Ronald McNair and the second being Ellison Onizuka, both mission specialists on the Challenger. Ronald McNair graduated from MIT in Massachusetts, then became a staff physicist at the Hughes Research Lab in Malibu, California. Onizuka began duty with the United States Air Force in 1970, where he served as a flight test engineer and test pilot. Both men were selected by NASA for the astronaut program in 1978. Ronald McNair is said to have taken on the name Carl McNair, and Ellison Onizuka is now known by conspiracy theorists as Claude Onizuka. If you are to believe the conspiracy, both these men give lectures at universities under their new guises, lectures about their brothers' rise to working for NASA from humble beginnings, both quite recently appearing at the University of Hawaii. Interestingly, a blogger by the name of Aoin posted an in-depth report on fellowshipofthemind.com about both men and the results that Ancestry.com had regarding the existence of their twin brothers. The results suggested that neither twin existed, as birth dates and parents' names yielded no definite results. Although this is not definitive proof of a conspiracy, it's interesting nonetheless. So, are Carl and Claude the twin brothers of Ronald and Ellison, or is this just another lie in a NASA conspiracy? Now, the case of Gregory Jarvis is an anti-conspiracy theorist's dream. In 1962, Jarvis graduated from Mohawk Central High School in New York. He was later bestowed with the honour of having the school named after him. He received a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the State University of New York in 1967, and a master's degree in the same discipline from Northeastern University in 1969. Jarvis joined the United States Air Force the same year and served until 1973. Snopes.com believes that there are no doppelganger images for Jarvis, simply because the theorists couldn't find anyone with the same name and likeness as the payload specialists. Could this be the case? If the theory is correct, maybe Jarvis disappeared into obscurity, or maybe, just maybe, he was on the Challenger at the time of the disaster, a less important, disposable pawn in NASA's game. Resnick was a graduate of Firestone High School in 1966, and in 1970 received a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. In 1977 she earned a PhD in electrical engineering at the University of Maryland. Soon after that, Resnick was employed by RCA as a design engineer, and later worked with various NASA projects contracted to the company. Now, there is a lot of information on a Judith Resnick, who is a law professor at Yale University, along with information on her years as a scholar, studying at the New York University during the mid-1970s, as well as her work as an author. But at that very same time, Judith Resnick of NASA was thought to be 250 miles away in Maryland, going through a divorce, but soon to achieve a PhD from the State's University. In 1980, Professor Resnick joined the faculty of the Southern California Law School. It said she remained in California for the next 17 years, which would place her in California during the time of the Challenger disaster. But the plot thickens. According to VeteransToday.com, following his daughter's supposed death, Marvin Resnick, father of NASA's Judith Resnick, moved to California from Ohio and collected $2 million from the manufacturer of the Challenger's O-rings, the failure of which had been determined by NASA as the cause of his daughter's death. If this is the same Judith Resnick who worked for NASA, could this background information on her academic years be fabricated? If the conspiracy theory is fact, then maybe her now wealthy father moved to California to be with her. Again, as with all these cases mentioned here, the accompanying photo does look like it could be the very same person 30 years on. In 1970, Krista McAuliffe received her bachelor's degree in education and history from Framingham State College in Massachusetts, and then a master's in educational supervision and administration in 1978. She took a teaching position at Concord High School in New Hampshire in 1983. In 1985, she was selected to participate in the NASA Teacher in Space project, and, as mentioned before, was scheduled to become the first teacher in space. Next to Gregory Jarvis, I think the case of Krista McAuliffe is probably the most difficult for conspiracy theories to argue, as the accompanying photo's likeness is vague. However, there is a Sharon McAuliffe in Alberta, Canada, a professor at Syracuse Law whose academic years are stated as being spent at the universities of Notre Dame and Syracuse. These alleged academic years place her well clear of the Massachusetts-based McAuliffe, but it doesn't mean that the information wasn't fabricated. The strongest argument here is that NASA's Krista McAuliffe's birth name was Sharon Krista. Again, it seems unusual that there is another person, again in a high-end profession, who holds an arguable likeness and goes by an uncannily similar name to the one NASA's McAuliffe was given at birth. Whether you are a non-believer, a skeptic, or a full-blown conspiracy theorist, there is no doubting that 6 of the 7 cases are unusual. Let's look at the facts. 2 of the said crew members are said to have twins. This alone is unlikely. 2 of them have identical names, and another 2 have extremely similar names to people still living today. On top of that, they all hold lucrative professions, as you'd expect of former NASA employees. With the case of Gregory Jarvis, there is absolutely no reason that at least one of the crew members would choose to live a more humble life, away from the high-end professions which adorn the websites of universities, law firms, and advertising agencies. After all my research, I personally think there was a cover-up. The fact that NASA's reputation has been tarnished for years amidst a series of cover-ups has a lot to do with that. But ultimately, for me at least, the photos, the names, and a story of financial gain make it all too difficult for me to accept the 1986 Challenger disaster story as fact.
On the dark side of the moon, the secret face of our satellite planet, which only a few men in living history have ever seen, there lies a star-shaped crater called Parsons Crater, named after the rocket scientist John Parsons. John Parsons is known by several names. He was born under the name Marvel Whiteside Parsons, and soon became involved in the occult. Charles Taze Russell, who invented the Jehovah's Witness movement in America, predicted that the beginning of the end of the world would commence on October 2nd, 1914. On this very day, rocket scientist John Parsons, better known in occult circles as Jack Parsons, was born. a brilliant rocket engineer, Parsons soon entered into correspondence with SS Nazi officer Werner von Braun, and by the age of 13 had begun summoning evil spirits and demons using magical rituals which Parsons had learnt from British occultist Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley styled himself as the Beast, and Jack Parsons referred to Aleister Crowley as his father. Grand Master of the Priory de Sion, Jules Verne, had written several books which strongly influenced the mind of the young Jack Parsons. In 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Jules Verne prophesied the invention of a submarine vehicle which could wage war from the depths of the oceans. In newspaper reports read by the young Jack Parsons, he saw German U-boats launching futuristic torpedoes, travelling under the sea and causing death and chaos. Young Jack Parsons wrote in his journal that if the French author Jules Verne's submarine was a tangible possibility, then why not the rocket ship which travelled to the moon and back in Verne's other books? For most of Jack Parsons' adult years, he was an adept of occultism and a distant disciple of Aleister Crowley. When Crowley visited California and gave the go-ahead to form a new chapter of his OTO Satanic Secret Society, it was Pasadena, the hometown of Parsons, which was chosen. Jack Parsons developed and patented several liquid and solid fuel rocket engines. His patented designs are still being used to this day on intercontinental ballistic missiles such as Polaris and the Space Shuttle. The Polaris nuclear missiles use Parsons rocket technology, which has a pentagram-shaped void impressed into the solid rocket fuel to aid faster burning. Parsons also patented an acid aniline mix, which was used on the first generation of Titan nuclear missiles, used to deliver deadly warheads and also used for high-level atmospheric tests. Coincidentally, Jack Parsons' occult mentor, the British beast Aleister Crowley, used to often call himself the nickname Titan. On April the 15th, 1942, Parsons demonstrated a plane powered by two liquid fuel rocket boosters at Edwards Air Force Base. The test was witnessed by Alfred Ledding, who fronted the US military's Project Sign, which investigated UFOs and helped cover up the phenomenon for decades. Jack Parsons revered the English Satanist Aleister Crowley and eventually became the leader of one of Crowley's secret cults called the OTO. The OTO, or Ordo Templi Orientalis, claims descent from the Bavarian Illuminati, which had been revived by Adam Spartacus Weishaupt on May 1st, 1776, and had approximately 2,000 members in Masonic lodges in London, Paris, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Munich, and Ingolstadt. The Illuminati was essentially controlled by European, Germanic, Jewish aristocrats who sought to replace the church, government system, and national identity of nations with an Illuminati-controlled superstate. The Illuminati was eventually outlawed in Europe, and the founders fled to America. They then fragmented their maverick secret society into fraternities operating from the campuses of Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. From his pulpit in Brooklyn, New York, charlatan priest Charles Taze Russell prophesied that from October the 2nd, 1914, the beginning of the end of humanity would commence, with the emergence of the Antichrist and Babylon the Great, foretold in the Bible's book of Revelation. Jack Parsons, born on that prophetic day, would later attempt to invoke the incarnation of Babylon and also sign an oath stating that he was indeed the Antichrist.
If we really want to understand what's going on in space today and what's happening with the plan to put weapons in space, I think it's instructive to go back and understand the origins of the U.S. space program. And to do that, you have to go back to Nazi Germany. Hitler recruited a brilliant young rocket scientist by the name of Wernher von Braun, who had a weekend rocket club, to come to work for the Nazis to build the V-1 and V-2 rockets that were used to terrorize the cities of London and Paris and Brussels towards the end of World War II. And for von Braun and his team, they set up along the Baltic Sea a place called Peenemünde. It was a research and development center for the Nazi rocket operation. And to this place at Peenemünde, the Nazis brought thousands of Jews and French resistance fighters to serve as prisoners, essentially slaves, to build this production effort. Well, the British found out about it, went in and bombed the entire operation. And so the Nazis said, we've got to move to a more secure location. And down inside of central Germany, there's a mountain chain called the Harz Mountains. And in that mountain, there's a huge tunnel where the Nazis were storing military hardware. Well, they cleared the whole thing out, moved the entire rocket operation into the tunnel, named it Mittelwerk. And just outside the mountain tunnel at Mittelwerk, the Nazis built a brand new concentration camp called Dora. And to Dora, the Nazis brought 40,000 Jews, gypsies, French resistance fighters, homosexuals, communists, even a black American GI were brought there to serve as slaves for the operation. Well, you know, immediately after the war, the U.S. and the Allies created the Nuremberg trials, at which time we brought the Nazis to justice for their crimes against humanity. But 1,500 of the top Nazis never went to trial. They were smuggled into the United States by the U.S. military under a program called Operation Paperclip, smuggled in through Boston and West Palm Beach, Florida. And Wernher von Braun and his rocket team, 100 of them, along with 100 copies of the V-2 rocket, were sent to Huntsville, Alabama, where von Braun became the first director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. What's interesting is the other 1,400 Nazis. Who were they? Well, some of them were brought to the United States to work for the CIA. Others were brought to the United States to do the LSD drug experiments and the MK Ultra mind experiments during the 1960s, where people were jumping out of windows. Some of the Nazi scientists that in Germany had been taking Jews and putting them in freezing temperatures to see how the body would react to that were sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio and were put in charge of the U.S. military flight medicine program. And so when you take 1,500 of the top Nazi scientists and essentially seed the military-industrial complex, the question I have is, do they bring with them an ideological contamination? Well, not only did von Braun go to work for NASA, but the guy that was in charge of the V-2 flight test program up at Peenemünde along the Baltic Sea, a guy by the name of Kurt Debus, became the first director of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And then the man that recruited von Braun, Major General Walter Dornberger, the guy that was sent by Hitler to recruit von Braun to come to work for the Nazis, he became vice president of Bell Aerosystems Corporation in New York that made its riches building the helicopters for the war in Vietnam. In fact, in 1958, Dornberger testified before the United States Congress, saying that America's top space priority should be to, quote, conquer, occupy, keep, and utilize space between the Earth and the Moon. And in fact, later on, in a speech before a national missile industry conference, Dornberger told the assembled, "Gentlemen, I didn't come to this country to lose the Third World War. I lost two already." And then finally, the man that was in charge of production and middleware inside the mountain tunnel there in Germany, Arthur Rudolph, he became the first project director of the NASA Saturn V rocket program that took the United States to the moon. And so these are the essential origins of the U.S. space program. The Space Command put out a planning document a few years ago called Vision for 2020. And on the cover of it, you see a satellite hitting targets on the Earth below. Let's take a look at some of the language in this so-called Vision for 2020. The Space Command says that in the future, because of corporate globalization of the world economy, they expect that there's going to be a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, between the rich and the poor all over the world. And as a result of that, the Pentagon predicts that there's going to be more and more regional instability around the world because people that are under the boot of these multinational corporations are going to organize. They're going to try to organize unions. They're going to organize to get these corporations from controlling their governments. And the Pentagon says, you know, we can't put a Marine on every single street corner of the world to suppress these populations. But with space technology in place, we'll be able to see everything, hear everything, and essentially target everything in every place on the Earth. And the Vision 2020 says that space superiority will emerge as an essential element of battlefield success in future warfare.
you